The chandeliers of Buckingham Palace shimmered like frozen stars, casting fractured light across marble floors polished to perfection. In the grand ceremonial hall, dignitaries whispered quietly, their murmurs blending with the soft rustle of silk gowns. Yet beneath the surface of opulence, an invisible tension pulsed, an unspoken storm waiting to break. Princess Charlotte stood near the dais, her posture impeccable, her gaze steady. Today, she refused a bow. Not to Camilla's son, not to the rules of protocol that had governed generations of royalty. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but in that stillness lay defiance, courage, and a silent challenge that threatened to unravel centuries of tradition. Then, before anyone could intervene, it happened. A sharp slap echoed to the hall, a sound so sudden and raw it stole every breath. Gasps erupted, eyes widened. The weight of centuries of etiquette collided with the blunt reality of aggression. "Arrest him!" a guard shouted, and the room fractured into chaos, revealing loyalties, power, and moral choices that no ceremony could contain. In that moment, the palace was no longer a sanctuary of tradition. It had become a crucible, exposing a fragile line between authority and conscience, family and duty, privilege and justice. The echo of hurried footsteps lingered in the grand corridors of Buckingham Palace, polished marble reflecting centuries of tradition and expectation. The ceremonial hall was filled with the glitter of gowns, the muted glint of metals, the soft murmur of dignitaries adjusting to their places. Yet beneath the surface, tension pulsed like an unseen current, waiting to snap. Princess Charlotte stood near the dais, her posture poised, her gaze unwavering. Today, she refused a bow, not to Camilla's son, not to the weight of protocol that demanded compliance. A silence fell, thick and brittle, broken only by the faint shuffle of silk and the metallic click of polished shoes. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Eyes darted, glances flicked, anticipation hovering like the shadow of a storm. Then the unexpected. A sharp slap reverberated through the hall, breaking the fragile calm. Gasps spread like wildfire. Faces drained of color. The room, steeped in centuries of etiquette, became chaos in an instant. "Arrest him!" shouted the nearest guard, voice slicing to the stunned silence. The order was immediate, uncompromising, and the hall erupted into a controlled frenzy. Courtiers whispering, advisors signaling, guards advancing with disciplined precision. Every step on the marble floor was a pulse of authority, every gesture a measure of loyalty under strain. Camilla's son staggered slightly, eyes wide with shock and indignation. Princess Charlotte did not flinch. Her small frame radiated defiance, her silence louder than any outcry. In that single exchange, the balance of inherited power and moral duty tilted precariously. Behind the scenes, palace aides exchanged tense, coded glances. The incident was no isolated flare. It was the surface of a deeper, concealed conflict, one that had smoldered in the shadows of lineage, protocol, and unspoken grudges. Voices rose behind the double doors, muted yet urgent. Advisors debated precedent, law, and ceremonial consequences, their whispers brushing the edges of history itself. Servants moved with careful urgency, repositioning guards, signaling that even the machinery of the palace could not ignore the disruption. Princess Charlotte's mind was a calm storm. She understood the stakes, the intersection of duty, justice, and lineage. Every gaze upon her amplified the moral weight of her decision. She was more than a princess. She was a statement, a challenge to entitlement, a test of conscience. Camilla's son, led aside by the senior guard, faced the first tremors of consequence. His pride clashed with the unyielding structure of tradition, revealing vulnerabilities within a hierarchy that, on the surface, appeared absolute. Each step echoed with accountability, each gesture under scrutiny, as centuries of decorum pressed down with an almost tangible weight. As the room gradually stilled, attention turned toward understanding the cause and potential ramifications. The air shimmered with uncertainty. What had provoked this act? What hidden provocations lay beneath the veneer of ceremony? The palace walls, silent witnesses to generations, seemed to absorb the shock, a muted acknowledgement that history had shifted in this moment. Princess Charlotte's eyes remained steady, her silence a profound counterpoint to the aggression. She had acted with clarity, guided by principle rather than impulse. The hall, with its glittering chandeliers and stately columns, had become a crucible for testing authority, loyalty, and moral courage. Every footstep, every whispered instruction, every shuffling silk gown contributed to a tableau of tension and revelation. Outside the hall, aides exchanged subtle, urgent glances. The ripple of this incident would extend far beyond the ceremonial floor, touching hidden rivalries, concealed alliances, and secrets long buried. This was no isolated breach. It was a spark threatening to illuminate shadows long ignored. As the final echoes of commotion faded, the palace seemed to exhale, holding its breath between immediate action and the unfolding consequences. In this suspended moment, one truth crystallized. Princess Charlotte had altered the balance. Her defiance had illuminated the fragility beneath the grandeur, revealing that privilege and authority were inseparable from conscience and courage. A quiet, almost imperceptible glance passed between palace aides. Beneath the polished surfaces, the shadows of family secrets and long-held grudges stirred. The SLAP was only the beginning. What lay behind the curtain of protocol would soon demand reckoning. The echoes of the previous day's outburst still lingered in Buckingham Palace, threading through the corridors like a stubborn shadow. In the grand hall, the memory of the SLAP had not faded. It hovered in the air, a silent accusation, a question without answer. Courtiers and advisors moved with measured purpose, their faces composed yet betraying the slightest tremor of unease. The machinery of palace governance had begun to turn, each cog meticulously aligned to contain the fallout. Investigators, their expressions impassive yet precise, gathered in a quiet chamber lined with volumes that smelled of dust and authority. Ancient etiquette manuals, leather-bound and cracked with age, were opened with reverence. Letters yellowed with time were examined under the soft glow of desk lamps. Protocol codes, meticulously written, were cross-referenced with historical precedents. Every document seemed to whisper secrets of a lineage that had weathered centuries, secrets that were now pressed to the surface by a single, impulsive act. Camilla's son was summoned discreetly. The corridor leading to the interview chamber was silent, except for the soft tap of polished shoes. He entered with the poise of entitlement, yet under the careful scrutiny of the palace investigators, even privilege seemed fragile. Questions were posed with surgical precision. When, why, and under what provocation had the SLAP occurred, his responses were measured, sometimes defensive, sometimes revealing subtle truths he may not have fully understood himself. Meanwhile, witnesses were quietly debriefed. Chambermaids, courtiers, and aides all had glimpsed the brief but seismic event. Their recollections varied. The tilt of a head, the tremor of a hand, a glance that lingered too long. Each observation added depth to the mosaic of tension, revealing micro-hierarchies and subtle alliances previously unnoticed. A whisper here, a pause there, created a rhythm that was part investigation, part moral evaluation. The palace itself seemed to absorb the scrutiny, its marble walls reflecting the weight of history and protocol. The chandeliers that once dazzled now cast long shadows, as it conspired with courtiers to highlight fractures hidden beneath ceremonial grace. Each hallway, each tapestry, seemed to murmur lessons in restraint, in loyalty, in the subtle power struggles embedded in every gesture of compliance. Hours passed. Senior courtiers and legal advisors convened behind closed doors, debating ramifications both immediate and symbolic. Was the act purely personal? Or was it an infraction with implications reaching into centuries of ceremonial practice? Historical letters were unearthed. Correspondences hinting at past disputes between family members, hidden provocations, and coded instructions never intended for public view. These documents revealed alliances long buried, rivalries maintained with precision of diplomacy, and grudges carried silently like heirlooms. The investigators' work revealed patterns, a network of expectations, obligations, and unspoken rules that govern not only behavior but loyalty. It became clear that every act, however small, could ripple outward, disturbing relationships and undermining centuries of authority. Every smile, every curtsy, every bowed head was a thread in an intricate tapestry of control and duty. To disrupt one thread was to risk unraveling more than anyone could anticipate. Camilla's son, under quiet scrutiny, began to realize the complexity of his act. Pride and entitlement collided with the cold calculus of tradition and legality. The palace's response was not just disciplinary. It was analytical, meticulous, and almost surgical in its moral weight. Each question pressed on conscience. Each document demanded reflection. Each witness's account revealed an aspect of truth he had not considered. Meanwhile, subtle signs of fracture emerged elsewhere. Palace aides exchanged glances, noting inconsistencies, watching allegiances shift imperceptibly. Hidden rivalries surfaced. A guard who hesitated, a courtier whose loyalty seemed contingent, a whispered rumor of past betrayals. The palace, a monument to control and order, now appeared fragile, its balance contingent on discretion, obedience, and moral courage. Then, a discovery. Among the archival letters was a missive from months earlier, hinting at provocation, a subtle insult, a veiled slight, a command interpreted differently by those involved. The document suggested that Camilla's son may have acted not purely from impulse, but in response to a hidden pressure, a silent challenge meant to test his position. The palace staff absorbed this revelation with cautious calculation. The act of violence, while unacceptable, could no longer be seen in isolation. Context shifted, responsibilities shifted, and the moral landscape became increasingly complex. The chamber doors closed on another day of quiet deliberation. Investigators compiled their notes. Witnesses retreated to their quarters, and the palace itself seemed to hum with anticipation. Protocol had been breached, authority tested, and the delicate equilibrium of family, duty, and power had been exposed. And yet, the palace held its dignity, aware that appearances must be maintained even as secrets surfaced and loyalties were quietly measured. As night fell, chandeliers glimmered over empty corridors, reflecting shadows of deeds and misdeeds. Every chamber and passage whispered that the incident was far from concluded. Behind the curtain of etiquette, a deeper conflict stirred, a convergence of past grievances, hidden provocations, and moral decisions yet to be resolved. A single, folded letter remained unopened on the secretary's desk, its contents hinting at provocations that had remained hidden until now. What it revealed would challenge the palace hierarchy, illuminate unseen loyalties, and set the stage for confrontations that could redefine power within the royal walls. The palace had not slept. Though the grand hall lay empty, its echoes lingered. Echoes of raised voices, hushed murmurs, the sharp sound of a hand against skin. Behind closed doors, the machinery of Buckingham Palace had begun its most delicate work, balancing justice, duty, and family. In chambers lined with tapestries depicting centuries of lineage, senior advisors and family members gathered in tense conference, their faces masked diplomacy over currents of unrest. Princess Charlotte, young yet perceptive beyond her years, stood quietly in the corner of a private sitting room. Her gaze was unwavering, her posture meticulous. Though the initial shock of the slap had faded, its implications had only deepened. Every whispered debate, every furtive glance between courtiers seemed to probe her, test her resolve. She understood that this moment would define her, an assertion of principle in a world where obedience had always been absolute. Camilla's son, seated across the room, radiated a mixture of defiance and unease. His entitlement had collided with the immovable force of royal expectation. He spoke, carefully, attempting to frame his actions as a response to provocation, yet each word seemed to tighten the scrutiny upon him. Advisors interjected with precision, questioning motives, precedent, and loyalty, each syllable a reminder that in this palace, privilege did not guarantee immunity. The conversation unfolded like a delicate dance, each participant navigating a minefield of hierarchy, reputation, and allegiance. Past betrayals surfaced subtly. Coded gestures, veiled references, letters rediscovered that hinted at long-standing rivalries. A guard recalled an instruction once given in confidence. A courtier mentioned a conversation overheard years ago. These fragments, pieced together, revealed a network of alliances and resentments that had silently governed the palace. Princess Charlotte's thoughts drifted to her own duties. She had been trained in the art of discretion, in the delicate balance of law and lineage, loyalty and conscience. And yet, the confrontation had stripped away the veneer of ceremony, revealing raw, human tension beneath. She realized that her choices now carried weight far beyond personal vindication. They would ripple through the palace, touching staff, family, and the very protocols that had long defined power. Camilla's son, growing aware of the precariousness of his position, attempted to justify his actions. Words of entitlement and expectation met counterarguments steeped in history and duty. The emotional tension thickened, punctuated by moments of silence that spoke louder than any speech. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, every glance charged with unspoken meaning. Loyalty was no longer assumed. It was tested, measured, and weighed against principle. As discussions deepened, secrets began to surface. A previously overlooked memorandum revealed a hidden directive, one that seemed to authorize a series of actions no one had fully understood. Family alliances shifted subtly as courtiers debated interpretations. The line between justice and favoritism blurred. Each revelation carried consequences for relationships, hierarchy, and the future of royal protocol. The palace, vast and seemingly unyielding, had become a crucible of moral decision-making, where even small gestures could fracture trust. Meanwhile, the guards observed silently, their discipline unwavering yet internally conflicted. Some had been trained to enforce law above family ties. Others had long served the lineage, prioritizing loyalty over formal justice. Their uncertainty mirrored a larger tension within the palace, the collision of moral responsibility and inherited privilege. Each movement, each unspoken glance, reinforced the understanding that a single act of violence had exposed centuries of concealed complexity. The emotional midpoint arrived in a quiet study, where a confidential eyewitness account revealed a critical detail. The slap was not entirely unprovoked. A private insult, recorded months earlier, had gone unnoticed until now. The revelation forced a reassessment of accountability. Suddenly, Camilla's son's aggression could not be seen in isolation. It was entwined with past grievances, subtle provocations, and the intricate moral calculus of palace life. In response, Princess Charlotte's resolve crystallized. She did not seek revenge, nor did she act impulsively. Her stance was deliberate, measured, and principled. The moral question became clear. Enforce justice at the risk of familial fracture, or preserve lineage at the cost of ethical compromise. Around her, adults who had once seemed infallible faltered, revealing that even the most disciplined courtiers were subject to human complexity. The climax of the chapter emerged in a rare private audience, where family members confronted the truth of their divided loyalties. Words were spoken carefully, but the weight behind them was immense. Past betrayals were named, alliances questioned, and intentions scrutinized. The hall, though private, resonated with the tension of unspoken history, with each participant aware that a single misstep could alter the course of relationships and protocol alike. Silence followed, not the silence of resolution, but the pregnant pause of moral reckoning. Eyes met, hands rested tensely, and hearts weighed the implications of every gesture. The balance of authority, loyalty, and principle had shifted. The act of physical aggression had revealed long-hidden fractures, testing every individual's capacity to act with conscience in the shadow of inherited power. On a polished desk, a single, previously overlooked document waited. Its words hinted at alliances and betrayals that would soon demand confrontation. What it revealed next would force immediate action, testing loyalties and reshaping the fragile equilibrium of the royal family. The palace had fallen into a peculiar stillness, but it was a calm weighted with unease. Corridors that had once echoed with ceremonial music now carried only the soft sound of careful footsteps and the faint rustle of draped curtains. The events of the previous days had left more than a mark on the guests and courtiers. They had etched a deeper uncertainty into the very walls of Buckingham Palace. Shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally across the marble floors, as if the palace itself were reflecting on the breach of decorum. Senior advisors and courtiers moved through dimly lit halls with a quiet intensity. Every gesture, every word, was filtered through the lens of protocol and consequence. Historical precedents weighed on their shoulders. Centuries of tradition dictated that no breach could go unchecked, yet human judgment, temper, and family ties complicated every decision. To act too harshly might fracture the lineage. To act too leniently could erode centuries of authority. The moral tension was palpable. Princess Charlotte walked alone through a narrow corridor leading to the private gardens. The evening light slanted through tall windows, casting streaks across her face. She pondered the fragile balance she now represented. A single misstep by the family, by the guards, or even by herself could set precedent that would resonate far beyond the palace walls. She had learned that protocol was not simply about etiquette. It was a moral weight, an invisible measure of loyalty, restraint, and foresight. Camilla's son, confined to his private quarters, wrestled with his own understanding of authority and consequence. He had acted on impulse, but the palace's response was methodical, unwavering, and deeply reflective. He realized that in a system built on centuries of layered expectations, even minor defiance could expose hidden loyalties, shift alliances, and provoke moral reckoning. His pride, previously unquestioned, now collided with the weight of history and the unspoken code of conduct that had shaped the monarchy for generations. Confidential memos and intercepted communications began to surface, revealing motivations previously hidden. One note suggested that a minor breach in decorum had been orchestrated deliberately, intended to provoke a response. Another hinted at old rivalries between courtiers, subtle manipulations that had long gone unnoticed. The palace's veneer control was thin. Beneath it, currents of ambition, resentment, and moral conflict ran deep. Each revelation added layers to the tension, creating a labyrinth of ethical and practical challenges for those responsible for maintaining order. Meanwhile, the guards, disciplined yet human, felt the strain. Some questioned their loyalties, not openly, but in silent observation of every gesture, every command. To enforce protocol blindly was expected. To act with conscience required courage. The corridors of the palace became a theater of quiet moral negotiation. Every step on the polished marble, every gloved hand resting on a railing, carried weight far beyond the physical. Private conversations between family members grew taut with unspoken accusation. Words were chosen carefully, each one a measure of both diplomacy and moral judgment. Past missteps, long buried in silence, resurfaced in subtle reminders, a glance that lingered too long, a phrase that hinted at past betrayal, a historical precedent cited with precise intent. Emotional tension rose with every disclosure, revealing that the palace's legacy was as much about internal vigilance as public ceremony. The emotional midpoint arrived during a private audience in a shadowed chamber. Here, the complexities of loyalty, power, and moral responsibility converged. Princess Charlotte's quiet authority was matched against Camilla's son's defensive entitlement. Advisors weighed historical protocol against human judgment. Every word, every gesture was an ethical test, and the balance of power teetered precariously. Silence punctuated discussion, carrying more weight than any argument could. Then, the critical turning point, a minor security lapse revealed itself. A confidential document, left momentarily unattended, contained details that could expose personal failings, challenge alliances, or provoke scandal. The palace leadership realized that even the smallest oversight could magnify tension exponentially. Protocol, it became clear, was not simply ceremonial. It was a fulcrum upon which order, morality, and loyalty rested. A single misstep could unravel the carefully maintained equilibrium of the royal household. As evening descended, the palace exuded a quiet but heavy anticipation. Every chamber and hallway seemed to breathe with the weight of history, with the expectation that each actor, princess, prince, guard, and advisor alike would perform with unwavering moral clarity. Even in silence, the palace whispered lessons in restraint, discretion, and ethical vigilance. Every decision, every motion, every unspoken word was a test of courage, conscience, and legacy. A final, irreversible act, an exposed secret, a breach in protocol, a misstep in judgment, waited silently in the shadows. It would force the family and the guards to confront not only their public roles, but the moral responsibilities that define their lives behind the palace walls. What emerged next would determine whether order could truly be restored. The morning sun cast a soft glow over Buckingham Palace, illuminating corridors that only days before had echoed with tension. The grandeur remained untouched, yet beneath the gilded surfaces, a subtle transformation had begun. Order was returning. Not the artificial calm of ceremony, but the measured, deliberate balance of authority and conscience. The palace, resilient yet watchful, exhaled as its inhabitants moved with quiet purpose. Camilla's son was brought before the senior advisors and family elders. His demeanor was subdued, pride tempered by the awareness of consequence. The actions of the past days had forced a reckoning. The lines between entitlement, impulsiveness, and responsibility had been drawn with clarity. The consequences he now faced were measured, steeped in tradition, and weighed carefully against precedent. Justice, it became clear, would coexist with discretion. Princess Charlotte, still young yet embodying an unexpected maturity, was protected and reaffirmed. Her silence had not been passive. It had been deliberate, a testament to restraint, moral clarity, and the quiet authority of principle. Her position within the royal household was acknowledged not through ceremony alone, but through the recognition that courage and duty could coexist, even in the face of aggression. Courtiers and guards resumed their roles with precision, executing legal and ceremonial reparations that had been meticulously planned. Letters were drafted, communications sent, and protocols reaffirmed. Every act was deliberate, every gesture carefully choreographed, reinforcing the delicate equilibrium between justice and loyalty, authority and morality. Behind the scenes, aides moved with the awareness that reconciliation required more than appearances. Hidden tensions were acknowledged, subtly contained. Conversations revisited prior missteps, analyzed intentions, and measured the trustworthiness of individuals. Each participant understood that restoring balance demanded honesty, foresight, and emotional intelligence. Qualities often tested, but rarely displayed so publicly. The palace itself seemed to reflect this restored equilibrium. Chandeliers shimmered without casting harsh shadows. Corridors echoed only with disciplined steps. And the gardens outside stood serene, a reminder that life within these walls could move forward even after turbulence. The moral arc of the incident had been addressed. Wrongs were confronted, privileges measured, loyalties evaluated. Harmony, though not perfect, was regained. The resolution, however, was not merely procedural. It was emotional, moral, and symbolic. Camilla's son had been held accountable, but the process reaffirmed the values upon which the royal household was built: restraint, dignity, and adherence to principle. Princess Charlotte's position highlighted that authority could be challenged respectfully, that courage could coexist with obedience, and that moral clarity was as essential as ceremonial precision. As evening approached, the palace settled into a reflective quiet. The ripple effects of the confrontation had been absorbed. The balance of power, loyalty, and moral responsibility had been re-established. Yet subtle lessons lingered. Trust must be earned, authority respected, and conscience upheld even amidst centuries of inherited tradition. A calm descended over the palace. But in the shadows, reminders of past fractures and hidden tensions remained. The restoration of order was complete, but the lessons endured, quietly waiting for the next test of duty, courage, and conscience. The palace had settled into quietude. Buckingham's corridors, once alive with tension, now echoed with the gentle rhythm of routine. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like fleeting memories. The events of the past days, sharp, urgent, morally testing, had left traces in the walls, in the air, and in the hearts of those who lived under its roof. Princess Charlotte sat alone in a shadowed sitting room, her hands folded lightly in her lap. The weight of responsibility was not new to her, but the recent confrontation had crystallized the true meaning of duty. To serve the monarchy was not simply to obey. It was to navigate the delicate balance between moral courage and ceremonial obligation. She had witnessed firsthand how a single act could expose hidden fractures, challenge loyalties, and force reflection on the principles that guided generations. Camilla's son, confined to introspection in his own chambers, now faced the quiet clarity of consequence. His pride had been tempered, his impulsive actions measured against centuries of tradition. In solitude, he understood the delicate threads that bound family, protocol, and personal honor. The palace, with its unyielding architecture and storied history, became a teacher, demonstrating that power was inseparable from conscience, and privilege carried the weight of responsibility. Advisors and guards moved through their routines with contemplative precision. Each step, each gesture, each silent observation was imbued with understanding. The incident had tested them, not only in procedure but in ethical judgment. They had learned that duty required more than loyalty. It required foresight, restraint, and moral discernment. The palace, in its serene elegance, was a constant reminder that leadership demanded reflection as much as action. As evening fell, the gardens outside became a metaphor for endurance and history. Their paths, meticulously maintained, reflected the order and discipline of the household. Yet beneath the calm surface, growth persisted quietly, resilient and patient. So, too, the lessons of the incident had settled into the consciousness of all involved. Courage, principle, and conscientious action were as vital to monarchy as tradition, ceremony, and hierarchy. Princess Charlotte rose and moved to a window overlooking the palace grounds. She traced the paths of the guards, the careful pruning of hedges, and the distant shimmer of fountains. In their quiet diligence, she saw the embodiment of duty, the blending of action and reflection, of order and moral clarity. The palace had endured as it always would, but its inhabitants had also been transformed. The events had illuminated deeper truths about loyalty, restraint, and the careful negotiation between personal integrity and inherited responsibility. The chambers grew still as night fell. Silence, profound and reflective, enveloped Buckingham Palace. The echoes of past tension lingered only as gentle reminders, lessons to be carried forward. The young princess, the remorseful heir, the seasoned advisors and disciplined guards had all glimpsed the true essence of duty. That within the glittering walls of history, moral courage and conscientious action were the unseen pillars that upheld legacy, authority, and trust. And yet, as the palace slumbered, subtle undercurrents remained, hidden dynamics, unspoken allegiances, and lessons that would quietly shape the future. The story of duty, courage, and conscience was not concluded. It had merely entered a reflective pause, awaiting the next test.